La Voie lactée and Le Fantôme de la Liberté were two films that Buñuel considered to be part of a triptych, the other film being The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, Le Charme discret de la Bourgeoisie. La Voie lactée was made in 1969 and Le Fantôme de la Liberté in 1974. Charme discret was 1972. He uses this word triptych in his autobiography, Mon Dernier Soupir, My Last Breath, because he loves the medieval resonance of the word. And of course, Buñuel claims that he grew up in Calanda, that part of Aragon, in the region of Teruel, that he considered was stuck in the Middle Ages, even though he was born with the century. He was born in 1900. That Calanda hadn't really moved on. It was still a medieval town or a medieval village. So the use of the word triptych, I think, appeals to him, and I can see why the word can refer to these three films. La Voie lactée is really, religion is a subject which he refers to, but via other characters. Here, Buñuel talks directly about religion, and not just about religion, he talks about the heresies. He says that he had read the book by Marcelino Menéndez Pelayo, written in the late 19th century, on the Spanish title is La Historia de las Heterodoxias, the history of heterodoxy, and the heresies then that have characterized the history of the Catholic Church across the centuries. Fascinated Buñuel, someone who's always fascinated by religion, and he decided to make a film about this, about heresies. Because in a way, heresies are a sort of parallel, a spiritual parallel to surrealism. They're both interested in revolt, in rebellion against orthodoxy. So just as surrealism is concerned with attacking the church, the army, the bourgeoisie, so heterodoxy or heresy is concerned with attacking the orthodox beliefs and dogma of the Catholic Church. Well, together with Jean-Claude Carrière, they read not only the book by Marcelino Menéndez Pelayo, but also a dictionary of heresy, and came up with a wonderful structure of heresies, in probably about 6 heresies in La Voie lactée. Why is the film called La Voie lactée? Well, it's called La Voie lactée, as the opening credits announce, because it's about a pilgrimage, the pilgrimage to Santiago, the Santiago de Compostela in northwestern Spain in Galicia, where supposedly the remains, Santiago de Compostela. De Compostela means the field of stars. It is where the star indicates the presence of the remains of St. James the Greater. And of course, Santiago is Saint James. So our film has these two rather vagabonds, these rather tramp-like pilgrims who are making the journey from France to Spain. And along the way, Buñuel, ever the experimental film director, decides to obliterate the boundaries of time and space, so that as these two journey from France to Santiago, we sometimes move into the past. We sometimes see become blurred as Buñuel plots his way through this narrative of the unconscious, as well as of mystery and of a kind of a journey through the fantasies of religious heresy. Along the way, of course, Buñuel while dealing with a subject which is very serious, and he's interested in why people are attracted to religion, and this is a serious subject, obviously, but along the way, all of that is expressed through Buñuel's characteristic humour. These two films, I think, are among the most amusing, witty, humorous films that Buñuel made, and for that reason alone, I think they deserve to be considered as major landmarks in his filmography. And as he engages the two pilgrims in conversation, it turns out that he is somebody who has a rather bizarre attitude towards human suffering and human poverty, because he refuses to reward the man who has nothing and gives something to the man who has some wealth. And clearly this is a kind of inversion of the usual way in which Christianity or theology is presented to its adherents, namely as something that is there for the benefit of the poor and the disadvantaged. And as this curious figure disappears down the road, what you see is suddenly he's accompanied by a dwarf, and they release a dove. Already there you have a kind of witty comment on the Holy Trinity, that there you have God the Father, you have God the Son, who is depicted as a dwarf, and the Holy Ghost as the dove. The road is a prominent motif in Buñuel's films. There are so many films that are about journeys. When you think, for example, of The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, that film is punctuated by a rather cryptic, enigmatic series of shots where you see the group of characters, Fernando Rey, Stéphane Autran, Delphine Seyrig, and the others, on the road, walking briskly. Where to? Who knows? They are pilgrims. They are like our two vagabond pilgrims in La Voie, lactée, on life's journey. Robinson Crusoe, 1952, is about somebody who makes a journey which ends in disaster, ends in isolation on a desert island. So that's one of the heresies that Buñuel is interested in talking about. In what ways is Christ represented by or embedded in the Eucharist? Is Christ really there, or is as some heresies have it, simply there through analogy, through memory, and not really there? Well, I mean, one of the curious comments that one of the characters makes in that scene is, well, what happens to Christ if once he's in the digestive system? So these are typical Buñuel jokes and digs. There's a wonderful way in which Buñuel, ever the filmmaker, not just somebody who is interested in the thematics of the films that he's making, but really interested in form, endlessly experimenting in form. So, for instance, in this film, you have this tautologously on the mysteries of Christianity. And that's one of the wonderful things about this scene, that he is somebody so convinced by his beliefs that he feels unable really to, or feels disinclined to explain logically and carefully and rationally the reasons behind that belief. Everything becomes tautologous. And he says, somebody says, are there any atheists in the world? He says, no, there are no atheists, or if there are atheists, they're madmen. When the elegant couple come in and say, in response to his question, if Christ wasn't who he said he was, why was he so successful? After all, there were other prophets hanging around at the time, Simon Magus, for example, and the elegant A woman sitting at the dining table about to order her oysters says, well, it's quite obvious because he was God. So that tautology, I think, is something which is beautifully done and wittily done by Buñuel as he introduces us to these patriarchal characters. Rather interestingly, in that sequence, and just before the elegant couple come in to order their oysters, whereas some of the other waiters are keen to accept what the maître d', Julien Berthaud, is saying, there's a woman who comes, she's a cleaner, and she begins to question him. And all of a sudden he becomes irritable and tells her to get back to her duties. So there are pockets of resistance, or at least there are characters who in even minor ways begin to try to question the orthodoxy of the individuals who are holding forth on their beliefs. They end up with a group of people sitting outside the platform where the girls from the Institut Lamartine are about to do their performance. And there, the pilgrims ask some of the people sitting on the ground waiting for the performance to begin whether they can have something to eat as well. And immediately, the people sitting on the ground there, the ordinary people, welcome them and offer them drink and food. This is typical Buñuel. Buñuel is somebody who sympathizes with humanity. Of course, he's critical of those people who are pompous and who are so rigidified by their social and religious conventions. And the head waiter is an example of this. But nevertheless, on the whole, you will find in Buñuel somebody who believes in humanity, who sympathizes with and accepts the good nature of ordinary human beings. And that is what is happening here. Question the orthodoxy of the head waiter. So here, when finally, after the girls have itemized several activities or beliefs that are anathema to the Catholic Church, finally the headmistress asks one of the girls to come out and talk about the reasons why it is permissible for human beings to not be vegetarians, to not be vegetarians like the giraffe or the sheep. And she asks the little girl to say when it was, which was the council that stipulated that it was perfectly all right for human beings to be carnivores. And she says, the little girl says, it was the Council of Nicaea. The headmistress immediately looks at her and chastises her. No, that's not right. And then with a flicker of a smile, but very quickly, the little girl says, yes, the Council of Braga. Now, is it that the little girl has forgotten momentarily that it was the Council of Braga, not the Council of Nicaea? Or is it that there's a little moment of resistance that is finally defeated, and she has to accept the reality of the fact that it was the Council, after all, of Braga. So just these wonderful little moments that show Buñuel in playful mode, challenging through various characters, even little girls, even the cleaner in the restaurant, challenging the orthodoxy of certain dominant beliefs. The place of little girls is related, I think, to the way in which women are treated in this film. Now, Buñuel is somebody who has female protagonists leading the narrative in various films. One thinks of Belle de Jour, Tristana, other films. But here, the whole issue of the importance, the place of women in society is, I think, identified with what Freud calls the virgin whore dichotomy, what Freud calls the psychic impotence, where sexual desire is incapable of being aroused in men who admire, respect their partners, and prefer to have their sexual desires aroused in focusing on what he would call whore figures. And as to the former, it's the Virgin Mary above all who represents that expression of the woman who is in a way above sensuality, above sexuality. This is the figure who, after all, was not only conceived without sin, the Immaculate Conception, which was a dogma that the Church introduced in the 19th century. That is to say that it's not something which is there in the Gospels. It's a 19th century creation, that the Virgin Mary was conceived, born without sin, the only person on earth ever to have been favored in this way, and also somebody who gave birth to Christ as a virgin. So those two issues have to be separated. Towards the end of the film, that whole question of the Virgin Mary's being conceived without sin and having given birth to Christ still as a virgin is brilliantly drawn by Buñuel in another of the inn scenes towards the end of the film. We're introduced to a priest, played by Julien Guillaumard, who often looks directly at the camera as he begins to narrate the story found in one of the stories written by the medieval Spanish writer Gonzalo de Berceo, who wrote a series of stories about the Virgin Mary. And this one, the priest narrates about the nun who decided to leave the convent with her lover, and in the meantime, the Virgin Mary takes her place, so that when finally the nun repents and comes back years later, the other nuns haven't noticed her absence because the Virgin Mary has taken her place. And the priest of religion, or any other kind of belief, and sometimes it's impossible to do so, and that point is made by the fact that the priest is sometimes found magically in the room as well. So sometimes he's in the corridor, and sometimes he's magically in the room as well. When you turn to the other heretic, suddenly we found that he too has a companion in his room, and it's another man who's reading a book. Is it because this man is reading a book? We don't know what the book is, but presumably because the man is something of an intellectual, that the priest never manages magically to appear in that room. Who knows? It's another of the mysteries of the film, and there's a kind of postscript to it, because as the priest moves away, the final point that I'd like to make about the film is that Buñuel wanted a film in which Christ appeared to be a normal human being. And so we do see him in some ways as a normal human being, joking, laughing, running, teasing his mother, played by Bernard Verlet. But on the other hand, this is still a Christ who is constructed according to the iconographic patterns and strategies of Renaissance art. So there he is, dressed in a way that you might expect Christ to be dressed in Renaissance paintings or 17th or 18th century paintings. The iconography remains the same, even if the attitudes and behavior of Christ are more recognizably human. But that's because Buñuel is interested in the force of iconography, interested in the way in which we impose upon reality certain preconceptions, certain ideas that have been handed down, force us to see things in certain ways, as Don Quixote, looking at windmills, thought that they were giants. And as the film ends, we see the force of Christianity. This is Buñuel's final kind of jokey point, I suppose, about the film, is that there he is, Christ is with his apostles. There are two blind men who chase after him and wish to be cured of their blindness. The point is that Buñuel isn't making a film that attacks religion. He repeatedly says this, that he is simply explaining or portraying some of the ways in which religion explains itself to its adherents. It's neither one nor the other. And in fact, the reception of the film aroused two sets of attitudes, represented by, perhaps best by, two of Latin America's greatest authors, Carlos Fuentes on the one hand and Julio Cortázar on the other. Fuentes, the Mexican novelist, said that this was a wonderful film that clearly interrogated all sorts of dark corners of Christianity, and as such was a major film in Buñuel's filmography. On the other hand, Julio Cortázar, wonderful Argentinian novelist who wrote novels like Rayuela, Hopscotch, said that this film must have been promoted by or sponsored by the Vatican. So it was a film that aroused contradictory responses in its audience, and actually it made quite a lot of money, rather incredibly. Serge Silberman, the producer of the film, must have really been a champion of Buñuel's, having already produced the Diary of a Chambermaid, but to put his faith in a film that on the surface was not likely to attract huge crowds. Nevertheless, the film did make money.